Hello, podcast family, and welcome to Regulation Revolution, where we are igniting a revolution to help the world effectively manage and respond to their emotional experiences. It's not about what happens to us, but how we react that creates harmony or chaos in our lives. Emotional regulation is a complex process involving many factors. We offer this podcast to provide insight for you about how you can fine-tune and powerfully decide to transform your complex emotional states into empowered instances of self-mastery, peace, and increased awareness. Instead of having your emotions control you, you can learn to have control over your emotions. The following program in no way constitutes therapeutic counseling and does not establish a therapeutic relationship or offer any premise of confidentiality with any listener or participant. For more information, visit us at regulationrevolution.com. Welcome to today's episode of Regulation Revolution with your co-hosts Amy Reamer and Barry Vassar, Heart and Mind. Amy is a licensed therapist, professional speaker, and teacher. Barry is a pre-licensed therapist and practice manager at Heart and Mind. To find out more about Heart and Mind, please visit heartmindrba.com. And welcome once again, podcast family, to Regulation Revolution. You've got Amy and I here. This is Barry Vassar, Amy Reamer. We thank you for joining us this week. I want to kick things off with just a little quote to get you started, because we're going to be talking about the start tonight. The title is In the Womb. So we're going to give you a quote from the very beginning, because we're going to be talking about the very beginning. No other period in a child's life matches the speed of brain development than the first 9 months in the womb. Rapid growth goes hand in hand with enormous potential, but also with great vulnerability. As you know, here at Regulation Revolution, we do like to focus on regulation in people's lives, what that looks like. Regulation didn't start when you woke up this morning. Regulation started in the womb. That is where co-regulation begins. And we're going to get into that. We're going to discuss how the baby's nervous system is impacted, how it benefits from, sometimes how it's harmed by the mother's ability or lack of ability to regulate their own nervous system. The mother's anxiety, depression, anger, conflict, whatever the mother may be experiencing, that child in the womb is experiencing it too. And so we approach this topic with a great deal of sensitivity and a great deal of grace. Moms, child caregivers all over the place, parents, grandparents, whomever you may be, adoptive parents, catch enough mess as it is over you should have done this, you shouldn't have done that. We're not going that route here, but we do want to let you know what's happening in the womb. We're going to be operating off of the manual that we have been given. And by that, most parents go out and say, and I've done it myself as a parent, I wasn't given a training manual when I had this child. Well, you were giving a manual. We're going to look at that. It's one that you inherited yourself, how you were parented, your family of origin, how your caregivers interacted with you. New parents nowadays have the opportunity to learn and understand how to edit that manual. They can take what was given to them that they are using to raise and train their children and can make the edits to it. We all have those things in our own upbringing that if we really look at it, we would say, I wish mom, I wish dad, I wish whomever would have done it different. We can do that. But we need to go back to the beginning and start with the regulation of the mother and that co-regulation with the child. We are all on this journey together. And when we know better, we do better. Amy, that's about enough for me. Bring us into our topic tonight. Where are we going? What are we talking about here? Laying the foundation, the in utero, the womb. What's it all about?
I will definitely second what you said. We're not here to sort of lay judgment or to point all the fingers at moms or pregnancy. But what we would like is for people, because I say, if I knew a lot of this stuff back when I gave birth to mine, I'd have been scared, even more scared to death, be pregnant to have a baby. So I'm glad I learned a lot of this later. I didn't know it back then because I would have been like, eat me grapes and just sort of lay flat. Nothing. And so I'm glad I know all this now, but I just want folks to know that we know that pregnancy can be stressful enough as it is, and especially your first becoming a parent. It's exciting, but it can also be scary and all of that. So we're not trying to add to that. We're actually just trying to help people understand it better. And I thought about this as you were reading that too. Things that we often hear about, or we know that you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that when you're pregnant. But those oftentimes are things that we have control over in a lot of ways. And so let's say you're not a big drinker anyway. It's like, okay, well, that's no problem. You're not going to drink while I'm pregnant, not drink alcohol, right? So for some people, that's probably not a big problem. But stress and life circumstances and experiences that might happen while you're pregnant may not be in your control. And that could be scary too. So this isn't about a finger pointing blame game here. This is about help to support. And if people can take away something, whether someone hasn't had children yet, maybe somebody that's listening that's expecting or something like that, I'm hoping that those folks can hear that we are supportive and just want people to know so that they can make better choices. Or if something happens that's beyond their control, the teeter-totter, right? They could adjust that teeter-totter from their side and do what maybe they can control or what they can do to help themselves. Because regulation can occur even in the midst of a crisis or stress where we can manage. And I think you were the one that said this, Mary, the whole, we could be okay even when things aren't okay or something like that. So it's not about getting inside of a padded room and having someone bring you food on a tray while you're pregnant. Because that, for some people, that could be more stressful than dealing with the outside world. So it's just giving people that power back. So that's what I'm hoping, is that we can help them. And I'm a very much a go to the root of the problem person. And so that's why I'm really passionate about this infant mental health stuff. Because I'm like, gosh, if we can set the foundation up really well, because that's what happens, is we give them a foundation that sets them up to be able to manage regulation and emotions. If we can do that in the beginning, that's fantastic. Why not? That saves me a lot of stress later than trying to fix those problems or help that or heal that or fix that later. Dr. Bruce Perry talks about how if that 0 to 12 months, if someone has good enough parenting, then you've set up a foundation for them to be able to manage life even when stressors and things get thrown at them. They can handle the teeter-totter better. If you have a child that first 0 to 12 months is a lot of stress, neglect, abuse, any of those things that are kind of chronically happening, and then they get removed from that environment and they go to a safe, happy, good place and get that good enough parenting now, they still are likely to have problems because they didn't get the foundation in there. Right. So that's what I'm hoping, is that we can talk about this foundation in the very, very beginning of that foundation, which is in the womb.
It's funny because I was looking at something that I had here notes wise and such, and there's this phrase that's just really stuck out to me here. Utero is the first home for a baby, and that goes into that foundation. But I never really thought about it that way. But that's the first home. That's the first thing you experience, is being in the womb. That's the first. No wonder people come out crying when they're born. It's got to be a whole lot better than when you hit that air when you get out of the home. But that is for 9 months. That's your source of security, your source of nurture, the sights, the sounds, the smells. And so I got to imagine that even just being born in and of itself can create dysregulation for a child. I mean, I want to say trauma.
Yeah, it's one of those first times the teeter-totter gets tilted. Right? Yeah. No, I thought about this. So if you want to take a moment and do this, if people are listening, if they want to do this, I think it's really helpful if you think about it. If you think about what is your go-to safe place, right? Like, it might be your bedroom, it might be a grandparent's house, it might be a tree house in the backyard, it might be a hammock, it might be whatever your space is that you can go to, whether you do it physically or maybe it's a memory and you go to it in your head or wherever. but that you feel the most sort of safe and calm. And it's the place that if given it that option, you're going to retreat there right away. That's what's home for people, right? And so that's where we feel safe. That's where we feel comfortable. You probably are very familiar with that space, what you see there, what you smell, what you hear. All of those things are very familiar and natural and normal to you. That's where safety comes from in our body. Remember, we last episode we talked about the tiger and the owl and all that, right?
Mhm.
And so the tiger is like, oh yeah, this is the cool place. Like, bad happens here. This is everything's good here. So that is what a baby has for 9 months. The sound of the mother's voice, the heartbeat that she has. It could be the sound of the other caregivers' voices. So if there's another parent around that's talking to the baby a lot and recognizing that voice. And I'm sure there are parents out there that have had ultrasounds and they want the baby to move. So they'll get the other parent to talk, and then that will get the baby to move, right? Because they recognize the voice. A smell that the parents smell, all of that is where they're at in that womb, in that temperature. All of that is their safe space. And that's what security looks like for them, because it's all the same. It's predictable for them.
So then when it comes to regulation, especially I guess the emotional regulation of the mom and how she's processing those things, something you said in there that made me think, you're like, that's your safe place as a baby. That's the 9 months. But that's not true necessarily. If mom is very dysregulated, if it's bid, I know there's domestic violence relationships. I know there's all kinds of things that could take place. Even just working, I've talked with moms that have worked 50-hour weeks, right up to 38 weeks in pregnancy and 39, and they're working 2 jobs, and you can see the stress. So I started thinking for myself and just thinking of those experiences with others, that maybe for some people, the womb was not the safest place, because that's where that tiger we talked about before. And I do want our folks to go back. If you don't know who the tiger is, they can go back and listen to our other episode to find out about the tiger, owl, and hippo. But where that is developing in the womb, maybe that's where that tiger begins its agitation, that the world is not a safe place. If mom is screaming or dad is screaming or partner is screaming or whatever it may be. So it's the idea would be that, yes, this is supposed to be your safe, warm, fuzzy place. But I go back to, if utero is the first home, then what is the parent providing in that home through their regulation? It's one of the things I know we wanted to hit on, the what it's like during that pregnancy. Yeah.
And like I said, a lot of these things are beyond the control of the mom, right? Like, maybe there's a financing, maybe you lose a job right when you find out you're pregnant, or maybe your spouse leaves you, or maybe something like COVID. I can't even imagine women that were pregnant, right, over all of that stress that was happening in the entire world, right? And so there are a lot of things obviously beyond their control. So how can you help yourself to be okay even when everything else isn't okay, right? So there's just a lot of factors that are playing into that. And hormonally, if you were stressed and we're pumping out that cortisol, then that's going to be pumping out to the baby. And so what you're doing is you're setting up a regulatory system that is already, like you said, sort of struggling a little bit. And you may have a baby that's harder to soothe, doesn't sleep as well, maybe gets startled by loud noises easily. And so if the baby's not sleeping, we know the parents aren't sleeping, and their sleep cycle's already not set up just yet. So anything that sort of makes that sleep cycle worse is not helpful. The quote that you read at the beginning, and we'll make sure that we get into the comments or somewhere that people can see the actual sort of research. So if you're more of that kind of a brain geek and you want to see the research, but there was a research study that it looked at women's sort of mental health and stress levels and all of that in the second and third trimesters. And then they follow these babies. And then at 6, when the baby was turned 6 years old, they did one of those little hair tests where they look for the cortisol in the hair and they can kind of age it back. And there was a correlation between the women that had higher stress, higher difficulties with mental health issues during pregnancy, and that 6-year-old had higher cortisol levels. Whether the 6-year-old
even 6 years past birth, they can still tell by the hair.
Hmm.
So it's the reason I shaved my head. I don't want anybody to know about my birth experience.
You don't want to know your stress levels.
This is what happens if you have too much cortisol in your baby.
That's right. Not like this. Well, they go back to being the baby with new hair.
Exactly.
But yes, so of course, life isn't going to be perfect, and there's going to be stressors and things like that. This is definitely more chronic stressors that are happening throughout an entire pregnancy. If a pregnancy is unplanned, maybe a woman's wondering, what am I going to do? Maybe it was a difficult decision to carry through pregnancy. Lots of individual decisions going on there, what to do. There's also studies about even if you say a terrible situation where you have, maybe there's a rape. And so a woman, the whole time that she's carrying this baby, because she decides she does want to carry the baby, but when you think about the baby, it's connected to a trauma. And so now your own thoughts might not be the best towards this infant. And there are studies that show if a woman's really conflicted about having this child or what this is going to mean or whatever, there's a lot of that kind of gets through. And so we want like you said, if we want that sort of whole environment to be a really nice, loving, nurturing, warm environment, we have to deal with whatever is going on. When I say we, the people carrying the baby and their partners and spouses and families and friends. I think it takes a village. It definitely fits, but we need to support whatever is helpful to women to be able to carry these babies in the best way possible, to give them that shot at life.
So almost any form of, we listed an extreme, but almost any form of unwanted pregnancy. Like, I do not want this child that I'm carrying. I'm just the vessel until the child comes out, which I do want to ask you about adoption as well. But I'm just the vessel that's carrying this child. This child's coming out, going up for adoption, going to wherever, such like that. Regardless of how I got pregnant, one night stand, sexual assault, or just unexpected pregnancy at a teenage level, it's got to be able to impact the child, because there is going to be stress, there is going to be angst. So it doesn't even have to be that it was a traumatic event so much as it is that I just don't want this thing I'm carrying, and the baby's feeling that.
If you think about communication, so much of communication is nonverbal, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily what we're saying or even what we're thinking, but it might be how we're feeling. And those messages can certainly get through to an unborn baby. They may not be able to spit those out in words to you.
Right.
But it's, just think about how you look at someone's face and you can get an impression of whether they're happy, sad, mad, whatever. You can guess where they're at just based on those nonverbal cues that you probably can't even name exactly why. I just think this. And so it's a nonverbal message and communication that's going on. So there's just we know obviously there's lots of different stressors and things that can go sideways when it comes to becoming a parent. And so we can't obviously eliminate all of them, but it's taking care of yourself in more ways than just physical, more ways than just eliminating certain substances or taking your prenatal vitamins. There's way more to setting success up for a child. There's even studies there's actually even studies about fertility and how anxiety and stress can impact someone actually getting pregnant. And of course, when you're trying to get pregnant and then you're not getting pregnant, then you're even more stressed. So there's a lot there.
I heard somebody say one time, and I can't remember who said it. If you know you said it, I give you credit for it, whoever you are. And I'm sure that you've heard it, where it talks about that this child that you're carrying is basically a stew. You have an old stew, you throw in some potatoes, some tomatoes, some beef or chicken, onions, all this stuff is just getting thrown in there. And it's like, oh, congratulations, here's the pot of stew that we made from cortisol and adrenaline and from just all of these chemicals. And it's interesting because I was talking with somebody outside of the counseling field just about adoption piece of it. They were talking about that the child was 9 months of pregnancy. The mom had planned on putting up for adoption. It did everything else. It wasn't necessarily an unwanted or you hate this thing in me. But when they adopted the child and the child is now an adult, they talked to me about the whole difficulty in this dysregulated child. And they were like, but he or she didn't have a traumatic birth. This was a natural birth right at the 9-month mark. And there was no substance abuse. There was no nothing else. But I wonder now how much of it was just that sort of mom's feeling of, I do want this out of me. Love it, but don't want it. So like, I guess what I'm going at is you can be rejected in the womb, is it?
Yes.
So, but I know adoption was one of those things that we talked about, or that we were going to talk about. But I was just thinking of that. And then they were like, well, there was nothing traumatic. It was an accidental pregnancy. The girl was fine. She wasn't on drugs. There was no domestic violence. She just didn't want the baby. And it was a nice natural birth, and we adopted in a few weeks old. And it's like, that's great. And they were like, and then he was off the charts. It had to happen in the womb.
Well, because one, we don't know how well birth mom's teeter-totter was working, right? Because we don't know what was going on in her life, regardless of whether she physically did a good job of taking care of herself and keeping her health up and all of that. We don't know what her stress levels and her cortisol levels were for 9 months. And anybody who's had kids, and you know how quickly they grow and change outside the womb in 9 months. Inside the womb, it's so rapid, just like that quote talks about. The change in the brain development is so rapid, which is phenomenally just interesting to me. But then there's that vulnerability, because if you interrupt that process at all, if you put, I always call it, it's like putting in a traffic cone or a barrier or a detour, and then everybody goes nuts because they can't go down that road anymore. That's what happens sort of in the brain. And when it's something supposed to be changing rapidly and you change it, then you've changed a lot. Plus, regardless, even let's say mom's regulation was really good and you did manage pretty well and good enough. We talk about good enough parenting, let's just say good enough pregnancy, right? Let's say that is the truth. But what happened was so when a baby is born, and we talked about the hole in the womb, right? But then when the baby is born, yes, their world changes a lot. There's lights, there's sounds that are different. It's, warmer or colder. Your temperature is different. There's textures and touch stuff that's different. So yes, the tiger's paying attention to all this new stuff. And is it okay? Am I going to be okay? What helps a baby to be okay through that birth change and that transition is the fact that there's a voice that's the same. There's a smell that's the same. There's a heartbeat that's the same. And so if all of that stuff is the same, the tiger can be like, we can handle these changes because this rest of this home environment had stayed the same. It would be like painting the walls in your house and putting in some new lights that go up and down, right? But the floors are the same. The smells are the same. Where the house is sitting, how you come in the house, that's all the same. So these are kind of changes. I can handle these changes because they're all the stuff the same. With adoption, it all changes. All of it. All at once. Whether that was at 1 day after being born, whether that's 3 weeks after being born, whether that's 6 months after being born, whether that's 6 years after being born. Whether the environment's a good home or not, it's still your home. It's still what's familiar. It's still what I recognize. It's still predictable to a degree, even if there's unpredictability, but it's my unpredictability, right? And you learn it. It's just like anybody who lives with people, learn when that person's angry, I'm going to do this to avoid it. So again, not necessarily a perfect home, but it's predictable and you recognize it. And when it all changes all at once, that is scary. And that is a trauma that really impacts baby and how they are. And you have
to continue, check out part 2 of the Foundation of Regulation, Babies, They've Arrived.
The preceding program in no way constitutes therapeutic counseling and does not establish a therapeutic relationship or offer any premise of confidentiality with any listener or participant. If you or someone you know is in need of counseling services and reside in the Commonwealth of Virginia, please visit us at heartmindrba.com for more information.